We have almost an hour and a half, a little bit less, probably an hour 15 to do this. It's a big topic. Yesterday, when you do panels and roundtables with a lot of people, you realize this conference is very experiential. It's all about touching and getting to know people. And so we're very hesitant to put everybody sitting here listening to some people talk, but we pick some very interesting people to talk. And we also want you to participate by asking lots of questions. The original idea of this panel in the theme of storytelling was to look at the different ways stories both aren't being told and what stories might not be, have been explored up to now, from both within Italy, the wine industry, and we brought a panel of people. We have here Damien from the Burgundy School of Business, who is trying to teach all, okay. He doesn't deserve it, but thank you very much. Damien is the director of, yes, I can say director of the Burgundy School of Business, educating young minds into how to be a better wine business something or another, right? All right, good. We have Jeremy Parson of Dio Bianchi, who was here yesterday. All right, give it up for Jeremy. He knows Italian wine pretty darn well for being a estranjero from outside of the country, but he is representing, we have business, we have Italy, we have Catherine Liao, who did the Cork Bin app. Come on, give it up for Catherine, she deserves it. She's worked with Oracle and other parts of the tech industry. We brought somebody technical up to give a perspective, a little bit of, oh, what are the opportunities there too. Elisabetta, who is, well, without her we would have no conference this year, so everybody please, a big round of applause. She is one of the top bloggers in Italy, and she does all sorts of magic stuff. She's worked on doing an iPad book about tourism in Italy, so we wanted to have a tourism person come up to talk a little bit about tourism. And finally, this man we call Evan Dawson with a book called Summer in a Glass, who, the reason we're having him moderate is because he has to do this for a living. Your job is with, what station is this? ABC News in Rochester. Yeah. He didn't turn his mic on, so he's not that talented.
I'm not that good at the technical side of things, right?
They just put mics on him and tell him to talk. So anyways, we invited Evan to moderate, and hopefully, please, yes, thank you. Hopefully keep the discussion flowing. So I will have a mic. We probably have one more mic in the audience. I'll let you guys do what you want to do in the beginning, and then let me know when you want to start taking some questions.
Yeah, and I think the more participation from you guys, the better. No matter what workshop you've been at or the discussions we had at dinner, I think what we're finding out this weekend is storytelling is the theme, but there are many different contexts. Arnold Waldstein said to me this morning, you know, that when you write from a tech perspective, it's a very different sort of a goal in storytelling than a wine writer or a winemaker or someone in the trade. So we're going to talk in some general terms, some specific terms, but please feel free to come in with your ideas or questions, etc. And I want to start with Elisabetta because we had some very interesting emails leading up to this event, and Elisabetta has been working hard on one important idea, which is this. Here in Europe, it's actually maybe more challenging to tell wine stories than even in the United States for one particular reason, which is that from the perspective of some Europeans, the story always feels the same. It's a multi-generation family. The grandfather made wine, the father made wine, now the children are making the wine, and you feel that that is somewhat repetitive. Now you may say in California it's the same story, some doctor got rich and started a vineyard, but that's not always the case. There are different reasons for doing different things. And I think Elisabetta, we would love to start with you when it comes to, if your perspective is, in Europe, it's difficult to differentiate. How do you start approaching that, and what are the effective ways to tell stories if it feels like they've been told? So, please.
Okay. Thank you. In the beginning, I wish to thank my friends Ryan Opas, Gabriella, and Robert for this important occasion for me to speak to a so huge and authoritative audience of wine bloggers, of colleagues, my colleagues. I beg your pardon for my English, is really lame, but I hope you understand me. So I wrote this night some notes for remembering some important facts. We must begin with an historical date, when tourism in Italy is a relatively recent phenomenon. The movement for the wine tourism was born in Tuscany 25 or 26 or more or less years ago. So now we have 154 wine roads in Italy, but most of them are not so effective because despite of the facts, the 20% of Italian municipalities have the possibility to find an important source of money in wine tourism. They lack this target, this goal. They fail this goal for lack of ideas, of skilled persons, of activity. And this is more or less the situation in Italy now. Of course, there are exceptions. But in the meanwhile, the wine tourism grew, and now wine tourists, there are many wine tourists who ask more, ask to the wineries, ask more customer service, ask different stories, ask more concern to the details, and what they obtain from these wineries. Generally speaking, we listen often. I visit a lot of wineries during the week for my job with my business partner. They obtain the same story with little variations. We are a family. Our winery is very ancient. The vineyards were planted by the grandfather of my grandfather. Now we visit our fermentation room. These are the tanks, and then we across the aging space. These are barrels. These are a barrique, and so it's the same history. Now, my business partner and me had an idea, and in this moment, in certain moment, we had an idea. And we asked to ourselves what determines the quality of a wine, the age of vines, the surrounding environment, hygiene of the cellar, the processing plants used, the winemaking process or maturation period. What? But more importantly, how can the wine tourist who visit a company reap the signal of a quality wine from the environment looking? From this question was born the idea to help the wine lovers to interact with the environment inside and outside a winery, what to observe, and how to decode what appears, what they see, what questions to do, how to interpret the answers, discussing all these ideas, our original project became a small conversational manual to help to understand and especially to find what you are looking for, the wine that we like more. And this is all.
And can I jump in and say that Elisabetta has made the point, among these points as well, that I will say as American, I'm not bored by the multi-generational stories, but I understand.
We are.
You may be bored, but I understand the desire to find a way to differentiate. And you know, I'd like, I'll invite Jeremy to kind of build on what Elisabetta is saying. I mean, you and I are Americans. I'm enchanted by a lot of those stories, but apparently they're looking for something fresher, newer, or a different angle. Jeremy, what do you think? Microphone? Yep.
Well, what I wanted to talk about today is relates directly to this, and what I wanted to, you know, when Ryan, not only did the Opazes and Mr. McIntosh do a great job of organizing this conference, but the questions they gave us baffled me at first, but then led to some great conversation. And Ryan said, I want you to talk about stories that haven't been told. And I started scratching, you know, getting the lice from yesterday out of my head, and the pronouns, and I thought, what's the story that hasn't been told here? Well, it's that great misunderstanding that's called the Atlantic Ocean. And it's really interesting what you opened, you know, saying, you guys are always telling stories about, you know, the Romans planted, the Greeks brought the vines, the Romans planted the vines, my grandfather, you know, grew the grapes, and Mussolini came, and then we won the war, and now we make the wine, and now it's great. And honestly, that story, I think Evan's 100% true. I mean, I make a living telling about those grandfathers and, you know, telling the joke that he told me or the anecdote that he told me about the war, or, you know, all that good stuff. But I think what this, and it's interesting here you say, you're tired of hearing that story. We're not tired of hearing that story. And that is that misunderstanding. Does anybody ever read that book by Lawrence Osborne, The Accidental Connoisseur? Just one person? Couple people. He makes a really, I highly recommend that book to you, and he makes a really interesting point about how when the Mondavis and Gallos of the United States in the 70s decided that Americans were going to drink wine, they took a page from Steve Jobs, right? Even though he wasn't around. American consumers don't know it's not their responsibility to know what they want. We need to tell them what they want, right? That's our job as marketers and manufacturers, right? Well, when the Mondavis and Gallos decided that we were going to drink a certain style of wine, and they developed this style of wine, for the first time in history, and this is the point that Lawrence makes in his book, for the first time in history we had a very large, rich, wealthy country that not only produced fine wine, but imported fine wine. And it's true that Australia does that too, but it's a small country in terms of population, right? America, all of a sudden you have this consumer base of 250 million people who have been told they need to drink fine wine, and they're also importing fine wine, okay? Here in Europe, you have Italians, and again, this is Lawrence's point, they make their own wine, they drink their own wine. The French make their own wine, they drink their own wine. The British don't make good wine and import, no, I'm kidding. And import their wine, but they don't
Careful, Jeremy.
They don't make a lot of good wine. They make some great wine that Evans had, evidently, and they have to import all their wine. All of a sudden, you have this country, America, United States of America, where you have this large consumer base, and you have people making fine wine and importing a lot of fine wine. A unique situation, okay? And what happens is we have these two poles where we're at home in the United States, and Evan and Catherine knows this very well. We're hearing stories about the doctor who bought decided he had to make wine and bought the estate in Napa and grew Chardonnay where no one should ever grow Chardonnay, and then on the other side, you have Europeans telling us these stories about the grandfathers and all this stuff, right? Well, the Europeans don't care about our wine, right? That you never, I mean, occasionally you'll see someone who will go to Davis, like an Italian will go to Davis and say, wow, I was so impressed by the technology, wow, I was so impressed. But you don't exactly have a generation of young aspiring wine bloggers talking about, wow, I had this 100-point Robert Parker Colgan, you know, that tasted like burning embers, and you know, I couldn't go to the bathroom afterwards for 2 days. You know, you never see that in Europe. And what I wanted to talk about today, and this is the end of my spiel for the beginning at least, is that has anybody out there ever read a writer named Karl Marx? Nobody? Heard of him? George interviewed him. That's it. He's the only I'm kidding. Well, Karl Marx, some of you may remember from your history class that he talked about something called estrangement or alienation. And as the industrial world grew, the human being was estranged more and more from his natural state, from his or her natural state, right? And what you have is, in the United States, a fine wine industry that was created as a luxury industry that people wanted to get back to the land, right? It's the doctor who wants to get back to land. In Italy, you have the other 180-degree pole, where you have a wine industry that emerged entirely from an ethical and ideological ethos of people who were tied to the land, who tried to, you know, you talked about Tuscany, and think about I didn't travel in Tuscany in the 60s, but Tuscany was devastated after the war in the 60s for a number of reasons. Now you go to Tuscany and it's manicured, cypress trees and all this beautiful stuff and great wine tourism. So you have these two 180-degree poles, and I think that's the story, that's my story that needs to yet be told. And in closing my talk, all the wine bloggers out there, I'd like to invite you that when you write about wine, think about wine in terms of its ethical and ideological implication, as well as the sensorial and aesthetic implications of the wine. And that's all I got.
That's all you got?
I got more if you want.
This is all just a warm-up for the professor. Did you want to weigh in? We would love to hear from you.
I will actually, thanks, Evan. I've just been listening with interest about the discussion, and I wanted to sort of follow on one of those points that you made there, Jeremy. The whole focus that the customer doesn't know what they want. I just wanted to make this point and come back to this later.
Hold on 1 second here. You Australians talk funny, a little slower for our European friends.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it sounds like English, but you're probably struggling. It's not like anything you've ever heard before, right? My French students give me that response all the time. So maybe if I speak a little slower, is that better? Okay. The fact is, I think the consumer does know what they want, but for all of you in this audience, we're trying to communicate with the consumer, and we don't speak consumer. That's our problem. The consumer knows what they want, and we're not listening to them. And the whole goal of this exercise is to be able to communicate more effectively. We need to spend more time understanding the language. The consumer's telling us what they want. We're not listening. Or if we're listening, we're certainly not listening correctly. They know that they want things that are tasty, enjoyable, easy to find, easy to move from one product to another. And we're just saying, you're not using the words terroir, you're not using the words romantic, authenticity, generations of wine grape growers are putting together. Now, I have to bring this topic up because I'm the evil business person, the academic who kind of sits here and says, we are a business. We have to look at the wine sector as a business while retaining the importance of the story and the culture with which we are all impassioned by. So, I mean, that's just sort of the point I wanted to raise at this point. I want to come back to consumers later, but for the time being, we are wanting to communicate with consumers. We need to be better at understanding the language that they want to communicate with us. And so that's essentially how I think we need to try and drive our stories, to be able to give it to them in a way that they want to hear it.
Good start, Catherine.
So as a techie, you know what? Wines are really scary. I mean, I'm probably the least experienced wine drinker in this room, and it took me a long time to really become comfortable with wine, and I'm still not that comfortable with it. And as someone outside coming in and wanting to capture the experience, it's really difficult to do because, you know, what's acidity, what are tannins, what's all that experience? I'm not exactly sure how to articulate what I want when I go to a wine shop, when I go to a wine bar. I want to drink something tasty, but I don't know how to communicate that. And what's been interesting since creating Cork Bin and seeing that, making it really easy for users to take a picture, just jot down a little bit notes. You see what people are describing their wines. I mean, yesterday the comment about gooey, those are the type of comments that I see on Cork Bin, right? It's not, very few people actually go into details about full tasting notes, but capturing that experience. And when I think back to my own wine experiences, it's always about people, about that experience. And sometimes I feel like that's not being captured and being communicated. And if I want to picture myself drinking a great glass of wine with some of my closest friends and talking about what happened today and what have you. Wine accentuates that experience, but my experience is not focused necessarily on just the wine itself.
Okay, and again, we're gonna keep asking the audience for any feedback and interaction here because we'd love to hear more from you guys here. As if you want to respond to anything you're hearing, please do so. But I'm going to keep moving the conversation forward. Jeremy spoke in big picture, across the ocean terms, and I think that's an important story. And then I think you can look down at the smaller level, and individual stories, and individual wines, and individual winemakers, and estates. And Elisabetta deals with the issue of trying to make things appealing. And one of the things that Elisabetta suggested.
There is another point for me.
Yeah.
We are trying with this book to share a different approach to a winery. And not simply listen, okay, it's so interesting, but to interact more and more, to be protagonisti? To be the protagonist of a visit, not so simply a listener.
And one of the things you mentioned in email that I found interesting was you look at things from a regional perspective, and sometimes if it feels like those stories have all been told, whether Jeremy and I agree or not, is there a way to connect consumers to the story of a region or a place first, before a wine? You know, and how do you feel about that? You thought perhaps there is a way to say, what's the story of this place? Let's bring people into the place before we get to the wine.
Yes, of course, because there is actually I see a misunderstanding among my colleagues, wine writers. Just only a small winery can be interesting because it's small, because the wine producer knows perfectly every plant, every barrel, she or he speaks with his barrique, and so on. And a big winery, a cooperative. I know very well the word of cooperatives. And it's not so interesting because it's industries. And wine is always an agricultural product. It's impossible to think that can be also an industrial product. But sometimes, I say often, it's also so. Then, my conclusion is the most important thing, one among the others things, is the context of the story. A small winery can be interesting. A big winery can be interesting if you put them in their right context. You cannot forget this for me.
Hold on, did you say a big winery can be interesting? I thought we all agreed that bias against big winery is totally acceptable.
Maybe for the technologies, for example.
Solo and scherzo. I want to hear, Damien, can I ask you, as storytellers, whether we're writers or whether we're communicating to friends about wines, are we biased against, is there a bias against big producers on the writer side? That is there a disconnect with what people are drinking?
You've hit the nail right on the head. I mean, in this room here, I don't think there's one person who would actively go out and say, I want to drink a bottle of Gallo. You know, I mean, everyone in this room is very passionate, very involved, and thinks that wine has to be the expression of authenticity of a tiny little region in the middle of nowhere. And I'm sensitive to those needs, but we're preaching to the converted here. The problem that we have is that we have to come up with stories which are appealing to new consumers. I mean, we believe that loyalty is kind of the key, but we have to attract new business. It's a basic maxim of any sort of business structure. You grow, you develop, you maintain your position in the market by attracting new business. I mean, loyal customers almost don't exist in the wine sector. Any consumer walks into a retail store and they're faced with 1,000 different choices, of which they want to compare 3. So they filter out everything that is not of interest to them. So these big commercial producers, they are very, very good at simplifying the message. And I hate using that word simplify because as soon as I do, the French turn off. In France, everything has to be complex. To be simple is not the way to go. It's not the way to develop. So as soon as you say simple, it's like, sacre bleu, this Australian wants to change everything. And that's, unfortunately, the problem is we need to do something to attract consumers to our passions. And the big producers do this beautifully. They keep the message clear, they keep it logical, and they speak consumer. So if we can't attract new consumers, we can't get them to the level that we're at. As modest as we might think we want to be and say we're not consumers, you all are. My first-year students who have been doing their program for 5 weeks are connoisseurs because they're mixing with you people. We are so far above what it takes to get the new consumer into the wine sector. We have to find a way to kind of attract them with simple, clear, logical messages that help them build into the story in their minds. They'll build a story, but they need to find it appealing to do so.
And before we decide that only artisan small wineries are interesting stories or only small wineries are fine wine, who was it in my workshop this morning? Jason, somebody pointed out that Dom Perignon has 3.5 million bottles a year. We think they're probably fine wine, I would guess. Those bum big producers, they're not worth talking about, I suppose. But I think that's an interesting context. Jeremy, when it comes to what you find with the people that you work with, sometimes you're writing for an audience of regular consumers, people like me who love to read your blog. Sometimes you're writing for people who want to travel to these places. Do you agree with what Damien is saying? Are we making some missteps in terms of understanding what the audience wants? What do you think?
I think we do make some missteps. I mean, we got to take a step back and say, you know, why are we wine bloggers? I mean, that all, you know, and all the questions we've asked here in the conference beg the question of why are we here? I mean, is this navel gazing, or, I mean, why do I write Do Bianchi? You know, I don't get paid to do it. And what is our mission in doing it? And I write professional blog. I write a blog for a newspaper, a wine blog for a newspaper, where I have it's made very clear to me by my editors that I need to write about under $25 wines that are available in that market, which happens to be a very big market in the United States. And I need to write about them in the context so that, again, I'm always talking in these kind of extremes. There I have a very clear, very strict limitations about what I can write about. And they always want me to put sex in the title somewhere. They want me to put numbers and sex. Anybody who's ever written for a magazine, and George knows this very well, they want, Cosmopolitan magazine, 69 new wines to taste while you're having sex. I mean, that's one side of that. Then the 180 degrees is, probably most of our blogs where we're just really sharing our own experiences and what we really enjoyed about going to, falling off a cliff into an olive grove.
Or drinking Nascetta instead of Barolo.
And drinking Nascetta instead of Barolo and making that type of discovery. I mean, I think trying to bring everything back together, I'm going to take it back to this. It's about we like to read about wine because wine makes us feel in touch with nature. And that's a very, I'm simplifying that very much, but when we open, why is it across the world, not just in the United States, but very much so here in Europe, we talk about organic farming and chemical-free farming. And I was in someone's home this week, and they said, this is my house was built with bio-construction. Freud talked about this, this urge within us to return ashes to ashes, dust to, we want to get back in touch with the land, and in the arc of our lives, we're moving more and more toward that. And I think that's, whether you're writing about, Moet, or whether you're writing about, a guy who's rediscovered a grape in Piedmont called Nascetta, ultimately, that's our audience, or whether I'm writing for the Houston Press, or whether I'm writing to Bianchi and just trying to tell everybody how beautiful my wife is and what wine we drank last night, people want to get back in touch with nature.
You used a term that I wonder if all of the European friends in the audience recognized. You said navel gazing. How many bloggers in this room have thought to themselves or tried to ask the question, how can I improve my readership? How do I increase my readership? How many bloggers? How many bloggers deal with the question, how do I get anybody who is an average consumer to read my blog as opposed to somebody in my own industry? Is that right, Brett? You do? Okay, yeah. We all do. It's one of the biggest challenges is to get beyond a readership of your peers. I'm going to leave this conference and I'm going to read all of your blogs. And I'm probably going to read a lot of them regularly if I don't already. But you want to break beyond me. You want to find the average consumer. And I don't know if there's a good answer for that. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear from our panel, but I'd certainly love to hear from you if you have any thoughts about, have you been able to improve readership? Can you do it without, I don't know if selling out is the right term or the wrong term, but can you still write passionately about a niche and still be an effective writer? Can you grow an audience? Can you be more effective? Or do you have to accept that some specialization comes with limitation? I'd love to hear any thoughts.
I just have
Catherine.
a thought from a consumer perspective. I'm just curious, how many people here buy wines online? So, and as you've seen, gone to different websites and look up a wine, buy a wine, the information that's communicated about that wine are typically the winemaker's notes and as well as the buyer's notes. It's very difficult. You're not exposed to any additional information about that wine that we all talk about here, what the bloggers bring, capturing the experience, the history. And to me, as a wine consumer, I see that as a big gaping hole, right? No one is helping me bridge the experience of my wine cellar, so I gotta go stock up, to the information that's out there that could bring additional color to the wines I'm looking and researching. And I think I'm really just posing more of a question, but I see that, and I don't necessarily know how you cross that chasm, but perhaps that's one area where readership can be improved and to influence and to drive traffic in a different direction.
Who would be responsible for? How do we get better information to consumers if they want it? Who should be responsible?
I don't know. I mean, so I see two things. One is if I just look at the life cycle of reading a blog versus reading a shopping site, when I'm researching a wine, coming across to someone's wine blog, there isn't an easy process for me to take an action, but I want to take an action to do something. Maybe that influenced me to make a travel booking or to actually buy some wine, right? And so the immediacy in this kind of new digital age, I want something now. And as great as some of the stories and the experiences that are shared, I'm not able to kind of, as an everyday reader, without the context that you all have, I don't feel like I can easily join that with you. Now, I don't have an answer to solve that, but that's the thing that just keeps on jumping out
But clearly,
at me.
from the technology side, there's a gap. There's a better chance to get more information out there, whether it's technical or information about wines, regions, et cetera. There are opportunities there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, as a techie, I want to solve these problems because problem solving, that's the fun part.
Yeah.
Right? And
It's exciting. There's a lot of opportunity, for sure.
Okay, I can tell you something from a producer perspective from Germany here, because there I'm actually really into this interaction with other people to comment about my wines, for example. One thing, of course, your consumers, your buyers that might taste the wines, but in Germany as such, they're not really keen on publishing tasting notes of a wine they love, because then they fear that the wine will be sold out too quickly. The other thing in Germany especially are the so-called wine media sites, and there's a big sad part to it that they do all these competitions where they then say, okay, we'll try to find out the best Sauvignon Blanc, the best Pinot Noir, whatsoever, and those 3 or 5 best wines will then have a tasting note, and then you have to search for all the others a tasting note. And at the moment, I'm being really brutal, and wherever I send my wines, I ask the people responsible, I know it fell out in the first round, but were there any tasting notes being done that I can use? It doesn't matter if it's a bad note, if it's a good note, it's just to widen up the perspective of the wine, to show the people it could be that this wine is not for your palate, but others can identify the tasting note and see, okay, it's got this and this situation, and maybe it does suit my palate. And this wide broadening is a great thing, but we don't actually have the people who are prepared to then receive the wines and then write a tasting note. I've done the next step and asked many of them, okay, I know it's hard work, just getting 3 samples and then tasting, doing a serious tasting note is hard work. What about if I sort of somehow compensate it? Sort of, if I pay a little bit of money, and then I have the big opportunity to have this wide, broad meaning about the wine. And many then say, especially the bloggers in Germany, no, we don't want to be paid, because if it comes out that we're paid, then no one will read us again, because we're not worthy as a true independent wine writing blogger.
I want to kick this down the panel, but I will just say that I'm not an expert on German wine blogging. But I thought, as an American, I thought wine bloggers writing tasting notes was an American problem. And I'm, as a writer myself, I'm sure there's not agreement on this, but I would love to see tasting notes just pretty much ended, or less focus on the note itself. Claudia, our friend from Hungary, wave Claudia, we had a wonderful discussion this morning where she was tasting Franciacorta wines down the line yesterday. And everywhere you went, the wines, I was very impressed, wonderful wines. But often they give you a glass and they say, this smells a little bit like lime, and this is a little bit like a little flinty, little mineral. And you say, okay, and you taste it, you go to the next, and you go to the next. And Claudia remembered one wine, and the wine that Claudia remembered was when a producer said, I cannot tell you anything bad about this wine because my wife made it. So I hope you like it. And they laughed, and instantly she felt something personal. And that was the one wine that Claudia remembered yesterday, not hearing the tasting notes and the technical information. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe tasting notes are important. Maybe the winemakers need that feedback, and maybe that's part of the story. And yeah, let's have some conversation about that if we could. We see some hands up.
Magnus, I'm from Sweden, and as I see a lot of blogging, I am a consumer. While I'm writing for myself and people like wines that I tend to like, So I see myself as much as a consumer as a wine blogger. And the problem is, I think, if, we do see us too much as trying to reach only a big audience, then we get like all kind of media anyways, and I think we lose the wine blogging identity or the style that we are our own.
More comments. We'd love to have some more on this.
I'm listening to you all, and actually, I write a blog. It's been like maybe 6 years. I started writing for a magazine in Brazil, a blog in a magazine. Then I quit. I just have my own blog. But I am actually a sommelier. I studied viticulture, enology. I worked in restaurants for 10 years. So all I do is like talk about the taste of wine, which no one here talked about. You call that like it's technical stuff. It's not technical stuff. If Catherine has difficulties talking about wine, it's because we have to learn to talk about like the flavors of wine. I miss a little bit. It's a story too. It's a way of telling a story when you tell the smell of wine. I don't think Elisabetta is like tired of listening to the stories of, ancient. She's just wanting to tell something in a different way. And since I study viticulture, when I come to a place, I don't like to be inside. I like to feel the breeze, and if it's cold and if it's wet, because that's the story we're gonna find in our noses. We're gonna smell it in the glass. So, of course, I have a wine school in Brazil, so I teach how to taste. And after, we always taste blind. So we don't even know what it is. And after we taste, we go back and see, oh, this wine's from that place, that climate, that land, that history. So this is how I see wine, and this is how I tell my story. From a point of view of the taste, the smell. I am very sometimes a little bit too much on the smell and the taste and acidity and everything. But this is how I tell a story. I don't have it's not a blog or super visited, but I know that the people that read me, they know how I talk. I'm not very popular, but they want to hear that. And that's, I think, I was talking to Catherine, and she was like, I don't want all that blah, blah, no acidity tenants. But if she and everybody that thinks like her learn a little bit, where do I feel acidity? What's the smell? If she learns to use words, because we're talking about words here, telling stories with words. If we learn to connect our nose with our brain, our mouth with our brain, and connect all that to an environment, which is agrotourism, I think we can understand wine better. Not only with stories from producers, also. It's all complementary. Business, is also business. It's complicated. Yeah, it's complicated, but I don't want it to be simple.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be simple.
And can I have... Can Professor, we see a lot of hands, we're going to get to them. Professor, can you respond to what she said, and then I want to make sure we bring it back to our German winemaking friend as well to make sure the question the comments are being addressed. Could you respond to some of that?
Yeah, sure. I'm not in the slightest bit against the importance, value, or complexity of wine as a product. I love it. I'm just as passionate as others. I mean, I might be more or less passionate, but I'm pretty passionate about the topic. It's not us that we have to convince. If we can't attract more people into wine as a category by giving them stories that they can appreciate, yes, it's complex, but it's like when you first play with plasticine. You do simple models. You do something simple, and then as you learn skills, techniques, you add to it. You make it more complex. You make it more technical. You add colour. We learned about wine the same way. Our story, my first story of wine consumption was I drank something that was cold and wet and made me feel sick. Very simple, a very basic experience. As I got older, I learned that the grape variety Riesling was important. That meant something different. I added a characteristic which helped me decide what I liked and what I didn't. I very slowly, over a long period of time, put together a complex mosaic of what wine is for me. It's my story in my head. But I had to start with something very simple. And we need to come up with those stories that are attractive to these new consumers. How do we get people attracted to the sector? And we don't do it by making it the most complex, technical, involved, authentic thing, because it's just too difficult for them to countenance. People can't start with that. They need to start with very simple ideas, and they start to put them together in their head the way they want to discover it.
We saw a lot of hands. Aquí, allí. Our friend from España.
I agree with.
And if you're going to comment, please, if you could stand up so they could see you.
Sure. I agree with what Sandra said. I don't want to demystify wine. I think there is too many books about demystifying wine, making things simple. And I think there are different levels of consumers. So you want to be simple. You want to mix it. In Spain, we have calimocho. It's wine with Coke, and it's a lot of liters. And it's now trademarked by Coca-Cola. My question was a different question. I would like to sorry, I speak fast. Más despacio. I would like the panel to answer the question of the topic, very specific, one by one, if it's possible, to you. What are the one story to be told? If you want one or two examples. Thank you.
Otra vez.
What are the? I would like every person of the panel to answer the question of the topic. What is the one story to be told? Like a title or be specific.
What is the one story to be told? That's easy. Jeremy, go. I think you touched on it a little earlier, but go ahead.
I really came to this panel thinking, what stories haven't been told? And my answer to that question in one sentence is the ethical and ideological value of wine. I think we need to start looking at those stories too.
I think I love that answer. I mean, I think I'll just answer that by saying I read a comment from an American writer last week who said that why do we have to spend so much time on wine books and wine blogs, and the whole purpose is we're just putting on a way to make ourselves feel better, that we're all just out to get drunk. And I found that offensive because it missed the point entirely. I find wine to be more connective and more, the people in this room are together because we're connected by the vine. And there are very few things in this world that can bring people from different languages, different cultural barriers together better than wine, and that's a story that I think needs to be told.
I agree. And just, just to give an example of what I'm saying, it's like, and along Ryan's saying, let's think about wine blogging in new ways, and that's what I tried to bring here. How about if when you taste a wine, you go, is this wine good or evil? Is this wine Republican or Democrat? I mean, what is this wine's ideology? How did it get to my glass? And just, I wanted to illustrate what I'm trying to say, and I'll leave it at that.
Others, they ask for answers from everybody, Catherine, so what's the one? But you kind of talked about the story you'd like to see told, which is filling in the gaps. How do you connect that, right? Do you agree with that?
And absolutely, and I think less so about the story itself, but how it's told. My background is sales and marketing in big tech companies, and my day-to-day is presentations, PowerPoints, but every single one of them is catered to my audience and to the customer trying to sell to their language. And I think a lot of times as bloggers, as writers, we're writing from our perspective, not so much of thinking about how do I write this in a way that my audience can actually understand. How do I write it in their language? Mm-hmm. And for me, that's what I would like to see.
Elisabetta.
For me, it's merely a matter of a personal choice. I am a journalist, I am a chronist, and so I'm not so interested. I love wine, but I'm not so interested to the flavors, the long finish, or other about the wine itself, about the glass. I am more interested to the history of the wine producer, to the history of his place, his family, something of more, if you want, journalistic. It's probably, likely, it's my limit, but it's what I I do better what I love to do, and so I write about this.
And Damien, story yet to be told?
Yeah, I actually think we need to focus on attracting tomorrow's consumer. You know, I mean, the idea is we want to tell tomorrow's story. We don't engage very well with consumers, and we don't give them reason to do so. We frequently have, I mean, we're in Web 2.0, and we're very proud of the fact that we talk at consumers and we don't give them much of a chance to reply. And if they do reply, we say, too bad, I'm an artist, this is my perspective, you can take it or leave it. Now, if you're writing for yourself, that's one thing, but I mean, I saw a lot of hands go up when you're for people who are trying to figure out how to attract more consumers. Give them reason to find you appealing. If you want them to accept and follow your story, give them something that can empower them to get in contact with you. If they're scared of what you're saying, if they're scared about the level of acidity, I mean, the first thing that someone tells me when they know I'm working in the wine sector, they offer me a wine, it's got 8 grams of sugar in it, it's got a little bit of residual, I mean, the TA is 3.2 or whatever. I never even taste a wine like that, and I've been drinking wine for 20 years. It's just not something that comes into my head. I want to know if I'm going to enjoy it. And that's what most consumers do as well. Tell them a story that can give them a reason to get in contact with you. And tomorrow's consumer is more interested in tech. You guys are the tech junkies. You know that you've got these tools at your disposal. Talk to them in tech. Tell them a story about how you went from MySpace years ago and jumped off that dog. Why would anyone still be on MySpace these days? You discovered the new tech. They will come running to your door to tell you about their story and how they were drinking a glass of Merceau one night and just discovered this new creation of Posterous or whatever it was, and that was the thing that really got their attention. Don't talk at them with your specifics and background. Give them little bits of information about your history. If you want them to engage and take on your story, give them reason to share their story with you.
And just to give you a little bit more on the publishing perspective, the question you just asked is the question publishers will ask you. If you can write one successful book, they will want more. And they will then say, what's the next big story to be told? What hasn't been told? George probably knows this well. George put out Judgment of Paris, and they probably wanted 10 books in 5 years from George if they were smart. Now, they haven't gotten that many, which is even better for us because George takes the time, but he wrote a wonderful book called In Search of Bacchus. And he went around the world finding the stories of the real soul of the places and really connecting the reader to those places. And I haven't talked to George about how that book came about. I would encourage you to go out and get it and read it. But I can tell you from the perspective of someone who is looking for a big story, my publisher said to me last month, they said, okay, time to sign up the next book. What's the next big story to be told? What do you want to tell next? And if you are successful in finding that story, you will find even more success as a writer. I gave you a little bit of a preview. All I can tell you is that I think, have you seen Mondovino? Who's seen the movie Mondovino by Nasser? Okay. I think it did a good job making people angry with people like Michel Rolland, which I understand on a certain level. Or it made people feel like globalization is all about homogenization, which is evil. This room is globalization right now. This is part of the globalization of wine. And all of the globalization of wine is not all evil when it's done for the reasons to truly bring people together, to break down cultural barriers. And that is the story we're going to tell next. That's one I'm excited to tell, give a little counterbalance to that, because I'm excited about the fact that wine can bring people together. I get a chance to practicar mi español contigo just for one weekend, because here we are. Why are we here? Because we love wine, we write about wine, we make wine. It's exciting, and there are a lot of stories yet to be told. More in the audience, anywhere where there's a mic. We'll get to the hands up, absolutely.
Hi, look, this is Jewel here from Wine Woman's Song again.
Right into the mic, nice into the mic.
Okay, it's Jewel here from Wine Woman's Song. Here's a story that's not being told very often, and that's called intelligence and complexity. I think we are all bloggers. The world is a dumbed down place. Some people like wine because it's an intelligent thing to talk about and something to get into and engage with. So I think as a blogger, if you want to have a niche, maybe it can be an intelligent niche, and it's not an ideology of having to talk about, I don't know, making it simple, plus you can still have an audience. I don't see how those things I agree with my Brazilian and Spanish friend here that our world is de-emphasized in this sense, in a sense in the word S-E-N-S-E. I mean that our culture de-emphasizes smell and taste through lots of like modernization, industrialization. So there's a lot of people who go to wine because perhaps they're attracted to these things. So I just wanted to put that point out that as a blogger, there is a market there who want to have complexity and perhaps go to blogs for that reason.
Hear, hear. Yeah.
Hello. I think a lot of information has already been told here. And I agree with my colleague from Brazil, from Spain, and as well with the last colleague that talked. I'm not, I didn't study viticulture, but I know a little bit about research. That's what I work with. I work in the wine industry for 10 years. And I study consumer for different kind of products we have. We are working several markets and several categories like wines and port and sparkling. And the story, every wine or every other product, well, I'm from marketing as well, everything needs a story. A thing without a story, what is a thing without a story? That's what marketing is for. And if you are web bloggers, you are not only selling wine, you are selling something more than wine. You are selling sensations, you are selling feelings. And in that way, everyone needs to tell a story. It can be from a winery if that person likes more to know details about how the wine was created. The more important thing for you, I believe that to determine what story you should tell, is to define who is your consumer. Because in our company, we have different consumers. For instance, in Portugal, my company works for 20% of the market because 80% of the Portuguese market is below €2 per bottle. We don't have that wine. So, as wine bloggers, as someone who is selling wine, you should know to who I'm talking to, who is buying my wines, who knows to read, for who I'm writing. So each one should be itself, but always thinking of who is on the other side. Maybe you would like to know the story about winery, maybe you would like to know something about the food match. It will depend on who is your consumer. And you can do a lot of research concerning that. Obviously, that is, but you can do it. But first, you should define and have the conscience that the biggest part of the market, we are not the biggest part of the market, we are a niche.
Yeah.
That should be important to notice. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Here. Know your audience. That's to distill that message. That's really, really well said. Ryan's going to keep going around with the microphone. And I'm just a moderator, so panel jump in at any time here.
One thing I noticed today, and I notice is systemic, I think, in wine blogging, is that there are so many fundamental disconnects. We're talking about wine blogging, and we're talking about reaching bigger audiences or big audiences. And to me, it's an odd question because you really have to define what you're trying to do. What is wine blogging to each of you? And I don't think wine blogging is one thing. And if you want to become successful, if you're going to judge success by the size of your audience, then you're going to have to answer the questions that are being asked by the most people. And I know that I do that sometimes, and it's not what I want to do. It's not what I would do if it was entirely up to me. And I think that what happens if we start focusing on broadening each of our audiences is we dilute each of our messages, and you lose the passion that wine blogging is. Wine blogging is fundamentally different than old media journalism to me, because it is passion, and it can be complex, and the person writing complex tasting notes can find an audience. It can be simple, it can be a photograph, it could be 3 words. But the beauty of wine blogging is that you're not writing for the same audience. For me, it would be horrible if we were all writing for the same audience. And you would lose those people that only you can communicate with. And I think that it's a very dangerous sort of line that we're looking for to increase our audience. I think patience is the thing that a lot of people lack, and a lot of wine bloggers lack. Ooh. And it just takes time to build up an audience. So I got to admit that I get a little scared when I hear these comments that I'd like to get a bigger audience. You don't want a bigger audience, you want a more passionate audience. And that's all.
If you don't know, that's Gregory Del Piaz. He has the biggest blog of anybody in this room, hands down. I mean, if you checked your blog stats today, don't compare them to his.
But also true, to Greg's point, he's built that because people respect him for what he does, and he hasn't diverted from that, and we know what he does so well. And Greg, I would just follow up on, we talked about the question of building an audience. I would always keep what Greg just said in mind. We all would like more readers, but we want more readers who will be passionate about what we're writing about, as opposed to just finding a way to get more readers. There are lots of easy things you can do. On the news side of things, you can slap sex on anything. You can, in America, they joke on the news that if it bleeds, it leads. And that's the wrong way to do it. Whether you're a news journalist or a writer of a blog, don't do the easy way, do the hard work, do it well, and eventually people will notice. I hope that's Greg's point, and he has done it just about as well as anybody. So thank you for the reminder. Blog. That's one of the most important points we're going to hear all day. That was great.
Evan, can I say,
yeah, absolutely.
Just kind of actually addressing all 3 of the last comments, I think it's really important to remember that, I don't know, I'm 44 years old, okay, just to give some reference. In the arc of my lifetime, the wine writing as a genre, as a category, was born and has exploded in a way no one could have imagined. Remember, guys, 20 years ago, nobody wrote about wine. There was, and this speaks to a really important point that Elisabetta brought out, and again, consumers and readership. Elisabetta, in our correspondence before, in our thread we had going before this, remember, and our colleague in the far back made a very valid point to this. In Europe, the majority of wine consumers want to buy wines that cost under 10 euro. Whereas, and again, going back to that great misunderstanding called the Atlantic Ocean, in America, people are looking, 15 is the new 10, but people are looking for luxury in wine. And I think it's really important to keep in mind in terms of who we're writing for. This is an entire, we created wine blogging because some very rich white men decided we needed to drink expensive wine. And that's how that's how Robert Parker came up, that's how the Wine Spectator came up, and that's why we're here too. And I'm just gonna leave it at that, just to say, try to keep that in mind, that perspective in mind when we're talking about all this.
You wanted to open a Pandora's box and you just mentioned the P word. I think that's a pretty good way to get people thinking about the sector. I mean, we're all looking for that. We're looking for the same thing that people on the internet are looking for. We want recognition. Just to sort of harp onto that point back there, we're not seeking a large audience. We're seeking an audience who values us as a credible resource. So you are looking for your audience. Can be one person. It can be everyone in this room. It can be the entirety of the globe. But I mean, this is the whole idea. You want a story. You need to know who you're writing for. You need to know what your background is. Tell them something that is going to engage them and get them attractive. Tell them what you're planning to do. Let them drive your decision making. You'll attract people. You'll engage them. I mean, this is essentially how we need to develop our stories for tomorrow. The history is very important to us, because we have that knowledge, we have that experience. Human beings forget 95% of everything they've seen, spent, heard in the last 5 minutes. So, you're gradually just filtering out every bit of information that's coming into your head and deciding what to retain. That doesn't change depending on what your age is. So it's the simple thoughts, it's the clear logical conclusions are the things that you stick into your mind. Your minds are very complex in regard to wine. You can add a lot in there. You can retain a lot more than the average consumer. But someone who has just discovered wine, they don't know how to put everything in, and most things flow over them. So if you know your audience and you want that, you want to be able to attract people, you want to engage people, you want to be recognised for your skills, structure your story to match their needs. Structure your story. I'm saying if you want to make things complex, you want to be recognised as being the most knowledgeable, the most experienced person, great. You can afford to write a great big story, and some people will find it interesting, but not many. And that's what you need to be able to judge. If you're going to attract a lot of people, you have to keep your story as simple and as generic as possible to help attract people, as many people as possible, and then slowly structure your story as time goes by.
So you sort of took some words out of my mouth along the same line. We live in the world of Google searches, right? I mean, every question, every time we surf the web, generalizing, but it's generally about I'm asking a question. And from a writer perspective, my challenge to you is really what questions are you answering for me as someone that enjoys wine, loves discovering about wine, and want to just really connect and find that experience. And I think as you focus on answering and helping consumers do that's where the traffic will come, and that's how the readership will grow. And I'm really drawing that from the tech blog industry, where the reason that there is such a high traffic and such high usage is that they are really answering questions and telling each other how to make a better use of technology, how to do something well. So how can I do well with wine? What do I do with this wine?
We've got a lot more hands up, I know, so wherever the microphones are, they'll find you.
Hi there, Simon Wolf from the UK. I think I'm probably stating things that have already been said, but there's a word I haven't quite heard enough of. Just picking up on things that Jeremy and Damien were saying earlier. I think Jeremy was asking, why are we here? Are we navel-gazing? And Damien was saying, how can we find tomorrow's consumer? And I think there's a really important word, which is education. Someone isn't going to buy something unless, to some extent, they understand what they're buying. Particularly in the UK, we have a big problem because I would say most people who drink wine don't understand what the difference is between a wine that costs £5 and a wine that costs £20. So I think as bloggers or anyone else in this space, if we can somehow help them by educating, by telling the right stories, by speaking the right things, if we can get that message across, that helps build consumers, that helps them understand what they're buying. So to me, it's all about education.
Evan, just a quick point, if I can. I find this point something that's really important to us, but I actually want to turn it on its head for a reason. Instead of trying to educate the consumer, we have to attract them to want to learn. I mean, nuclear physics is a very interesting, very detailed topic. I don't think anyone in this room has a slight interest in being educated about nuclear physics because it's not relevant to them. But wine is something we want to learn about. And so because we want to learn about, we pick up bits of information, we have an attraction here and there. If we force education onto the consumer as something that they have to do to have an interest in our topic, then it's something that might end up being like nuclear physics to them. We want to be able to get them to want to learn about wine, and that to me is a very important distinction. If we can encourage them to learn, that will be a different matter, and I'm fully in support of that.
Ryan is looking at me saying, 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, how many comments can we get in? Microphones will find the hands, and I can't unfortunately be responsible, but Ryan can. So if you're upset and you don't get called on, that guy right there, he's the nicest guy in the room too.
Hi. I just wanted to ask the question, how many people in this room have partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, roommates, lovers that don't work in the wine community at all. A lot. And it's really interesting when we're able to travel together with our partners to wine regions, because I think that you find that you have very different interests. We like to talk malolactic fermentation, Brix levels, all that. A lot of times all our partner wants is something light, crisp, fun, with a sunset, a mariachi band, whatever it is. And my partner and I, we both read wine blogs, but we read very different wine blogs. And there's certain wine blogs from me, and there's other wine blogs from my partner. We're both wine consumers, and we both love wine blogs. So I think that we need to remember that it's not a monolith. We're not talking about one certain consumer. We're talking about many different consumers, and we're talking about many different kinds of wine writers. So I don't think that we can find one answer in an hour and a half for this question. So, voilà.
Keep it going. Very well said, by the way. Keep the mic going. Where are we next? Oh.
Yeah, I've heard so many opinions today and so many approaches, and there's one word missing for me, and I think it's important for everyone, and this is emotion. Because wine is an emotional product, and I think that emotion fits for everything I've heard today, but it's a word I didn't hear, so that's...
I love that point. That's great.
Okay,
I think we should be open to emotion. Elisabetta, yeah.
Yes. Simply, I think it's true. The emotion is important. I can sell an emotion, but I can sell an emotion also speaking about art, about fashion, about cinema. What makes wine so particular? We cannot stop ourselves to the emotion, to the feelings, to the sensation, because there are other things which can transmit us this kind of feelings.
I have this vision of Jeremy and I saying, this Barolo was made by this man's grandfather and then the father, and then Elisabetta's in the next room going, this Barolo was made by this man's grandfather and the father. We're all differently emotional on all things, but I love being open to emotion, so well said. Where are we at?
Hello, I'm not a wine producer, neither a wine blogger. What I'm doing is sometimes in the back of your head, but never in the front part of your head. So we're trying to communicate about moderate and responsible consumption. And I really envy you, all of you, because you get to talk with people that they are really passionate with wine and they really like it. But we get to talk with people that they think that wine is sometimes a little bit evil, and they really don't understand why we are so passionate. And maybe this is in Europe quite more intense in some regions, but maybe in US it will be also, I don't know if the political situation changed, maybe we all drink tea in some years. So what I'm trying to say is, if you take Santa Giulia, for example, this chapel that we are, and you put it in the States, then you will have something like a new Disneyland. You will have people going there, lines, queues, different gadgets with Santa Giulia, different things. If you look here and you say, where is Santa Giulia? You say, somewhere there, I don't remember now. The guards here are, okay, this is something from the 5th century, I don't really know. And what I'm trying to say is, sometimes, some stories are not told because we are living the stories. It is integral part of our culture. So sometimes we need to communicate what is the added value of the wine in the society. What is the drinking culture that we have embraced? Why we're drinking, why we enjoy drinking. And this sometimes we forgot it. We forgot it because we stuck in the details of, this wine was made from this entrepreneur, or this wine was go back. So why we don't try all together to communicate why people drink wine and why wine has a legitimate place in our society for more than 1,000 years? So this is my question.
Well, I think we're all looking at each other saying, that was perfectly said, we have nothing to add. That was great.
And sadly, we have to call it our last question.
I figured you were going to do that.
Yes. So I want to thank, please, everybody. Let's thank the wonderful panel. I think it was a great discussion.